Alright, here's our first video on solving by factoring. So we're solving polynomial equations. Our method of solving is going to be factoring. So why do we learn all this factoring? It allows us to solve equations that we wouldn't be able to solve otherwise. So first thing you want to do when you're solving is you want to get everything on the same side of the equal sign. If it's possible, your highest exponent, let's have that be a positive term. It just makes the factoring easier. So I want to get this x plus 30 over to the other side. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides, and I'm also going to subtract 30 from both sides. So I'm kind of doing that all at the same time. Our equation becomes x squared minus x minus 30 equals 0. Alright, so now that everything's on one side and 0's on the other side, we are going to factor this. Once it's in factored form, then we're able to set up our small equations and solve. So what we want to notice is this is a trinomial. You want to see if you have a common factor for all three terms. We can see that they have no common factors. So because it's just the x squared, remember that ax squared plus bx equals c. If your a value equals 1, these are the easier ones to factor. So what we do is we focus on our last term, that negative 30. We want factors of negative 30 that add up to this middle term of negative 1. So factors of 30 are 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. But they have to multiply to a negative 30, which tells me of the two numbers, one of them will be negative. So they have to add up to this middle term, negative x, so we have to find two numbers that add up to negative 1. So because they are adding up to a negative value, I know that the bigger number will be negative. So I'm making all the bigger numbers negative over there. So if you look at all your factor pairs, only one pair over here will add up to a negative 1, and that is the 5 and the negative 6. So now we go ahead and factor that. We have x plus 5 and x minus 6 equals 0. And now we get to use that zero product property in math that tells us if you're multiplying two things, an x plus 5 and an x minus 6, and you get 0 as your answer, we set them both equal to 0 and solve. So we would subtract 5, and we get x equals a negative 5. We would add 6, and x is also a positive 6. And we have solved that for x. Whoa, all right, next example. Again, we want to get everything on one side of the equal sign so that we can factor this. Whatever your highest exponent is, you want that term to be positive, so very similar to the last one. I have a positive 2y squared, so I'm going to subtract that from both sides. I'm going to subtract the 24y from both sides. So we end up with y cubed minus the 2y squared minus the 24y equals 0. So you want everything on one side, 0 on the other side. All right, so in this example, you might notice that all three terms have a y in common. So what we're going to do is factor that y out. It's called your GCF factoring. We're taking out our greatest common factor. So if you factor a y out, basically it just reduces all of these y's by 1. So that's going to leave you with a y squared minus 2y to the first power minus 24, and there's no longer a y there because we factored it out front, and it still equals 0. All right, so we've got our y out front. Now we want to think about this trinomial inside to see if we can factor this. Well, I noticed that it's a trinomial, ax squared plus bx plus c. Your a value is 1, so that means you can go right to your c value, that negative 24, and find factors of negative 24 that add up to negative 2, this negative 2 right here in the middle. So we have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. Because it's a negative 24, that means either the small numbers are negative or the big numbers are negative. So look to see what they're adding up to. They're adding up to a negative 2, so that means the larger number is negative. All right, so you look at all your factor pairs till you find the pair that adds up to negative 2. We can see that's a 4 and a negative 6. So this y comes down out front, and then we're going to have y plus 4 and y minus 6 equals 0. All right, so we have this factored completely. now that it's factored all the way, you see how we're separated by multiplication here, and we're separated by multiplication here. So we're going to set the y plus 4, and the y minus 6 all equal to 0. We get these little mini equations. All right, so we solve each one, so y is going to be equal to, that's a really bad bracket. You got a 0 for that one. On this one we would subtract 4, so you have a negative 4. And over here we would add 6, we have a positive 6. So we have 3 answers for y.